Ka tīmata nai nei me tō tātou nei hoa, Professor Jenny Lee Morgan. Koe te tai o ngā kai whakahaere o te whare rangahau o pū rangakura. Ko tāna kaupapa i te rānei e pāna ki te koutou, nā Kare-ā-roto me ngā pū rākau. Nō reira e te hoa tēnā koe, tēnā tātou.
Kia ora tātou, hui piri nei tēnei ahi, tēnā koutou, tēnā koe te tuakana, nau tēnei kaupapa i whakarite i poipoi mā tātou katoa, nō reira e kore mutu ngā mihi ki a koe, o tira ki a tātou, noho mai nei tēnā koutou, ki oku hoa, Kare-ā ki te a koutou, mo te wāroa, tēnā koutou, oku hoa mahi, koutou, Kare-ā no ki a tūtaki, tēnā koutou. Jenny Lee Morgan tōku ingoa, mihi atu ki tēnei o ngā marae, tautoko ngā mihi kua mihia. Ki te awa, wai ti koe, e rere atu nei, tēnā koe, te moana, e kare ana te wai te mata, tēnā koe ngā maunga e tāwharau nei, tēnā koutou, te marae manaaki nei, tēnā koe. I was feeling sort of okay about this presentation until my mum arrived. And now I feel nervous again. So kia ora mum, lovely to have you here. Yesterday, Leonie asked us to start off with telling everyone how we were feeling and name one word in terms of our emotions. And yesterday I said wai, because I was feeling teary. And I told Leonie I was feeling teary, and she said, well, don't tell any pūrākau that are too close to you. And anyway, wai did come true yesterday in that kōrero. But today I'm feeling wai marino. So it's nice to be here. Eruera, my husband, talked this morning about our connections to this place. And the last time we were here with my mum was to say farewell to one of our papa, my mum's husband, of 22 years, Awi Riddell. And so it's with full emotion, again, that tūau ki roto i tēnei o ngā whare, me te maumahara i aia, me ngā tieni o ngā tāngata i hara mai ki te poroa ki i aia, me ngā tangi, me ngā roimata. Pupu ake te pauri. Me te apu. So lovely to be back here, and I just want to acknowledge all of the emotions in the room. I see my beautiful team, Pūrangakura over here, and I want to acknowledge how hard everyone's been working on a proposal that we still haven't got in, that's due tomorrow, and things have been difficult. I want to acknowledge the emotions that we all carry personally in our whānau, in our everyday lives, with our children, with our parents, with our aunties and uncles and cousins and sisters and brothers. Being Māori is not easy, and I know in all of our whānau we have expressions of the impact of colonialism on our whānau, and they come out in really hard ways for us all. And so acknowledge all of those things that we're all bringing, all of the challenges that we bring in professionally, to this mahi. And as Leonie always reminds me, and people like Graham and Linda, that this kaupapa Māori research is not an academic luxury. We're in this because we do want to think about how it makes a difference for us. So, not talking about emotions as if it's a theoretical thing, and just really acknowledging it for all of us, being emotional. I'm feeling emotional. My mum can vouch since I was about 15, and saying kōrero at home, I'd always cry. I don't know why, just deeply connected to how I was feeling, or I don't know, some might say, all the psychologists might say I'm unregulated, I'm not sure. But lovely to be here, and just to pick up on a couple of things that have been said about this morning, particularly with Rangi's kōrero around the taiao, and wai in particular. proposal is about why that we're writing, and we're thinking about it in terms of regenerating kāinga for flourishing kāinga. And it makes me think about, you know, when I say ko oruarangi te awa, so we're from, part of us is from Ihumātao, and our awa is polluted, and there's dye spills, and it's just been restreamed, you know, after the oxidation ponds went in the 1960s of 720 hectares of sewage being dumped there. It's since been restreamed, and we're trying to heal from that. But when you have a highly polluted awa where there is intense industrialisation, where industries dump in that awa because it's cheaper to remove waste any other way, and they just pay the $1,500 fine, and your awa is polluted, and the waterways, te mānukanuka o Hotirua, the Manukau Harbour is polluted. It's very hard to not be emotional about that. So connecting to, as Leonie said, our way, our taiao, has real impact on who we are and how we are. I was also thinking that in our whānau, one of my children, his name's Waioro, and he was named by my grandmother, and so we've got, I'm going to show you a photo actually, should go straight to that maybe. A photo of our whānau, and on the left-hand side, my Chinese grandfather's in the middle. The left-hand side of him is my great-grandmother, Nana Hinganoho, and next to her is my grandmother, Māta Wihongi, the second wife of my grandfather. A bit like Tamanui te rā, but anyway. And so Māta's from Kaikohe, and now buried in Mangakahia, or the Urupa, Wihongi Urupa Mangakahia Road. But I asked this grandmother of ours to name my youngest boy, and she named him Waioro after the awa there. But Waioro means the echoing waters, and her sister, my auntie, is named Waioro, and he takes his name from her. And I was thinking, being here in Te Māhurehure and thinking about Aue, and Waioro just told my mum and I that he now thinks that he will be a teacher. And it's just struck me about this echoing nature of our lives and why we're given names. And Aue was a teacher, my mum was a teacher, my father was a teacher, I've been a teacher, and Waioro has said now he wants to be a teacher. Hoi anō. Whakaaro noiho, ko era ngā Kare-ā-roto ki roti au tēnei wā. But really, you know, Rangi's kōrero about the biggest decolonising tool is time. The privilege to pause. The privilege to pause and reflect and have a little think. You know, that's critical if we're going to move and understand emotions, work with emotions, and in this case, pūrākau. And, you know, coming back to the tangi, one of the people at the tangi was Wayne Ngata. He was an old student of Aue's, and I took the opportunity when I saw him at Waipiro Bay to have a kōrero about this kaupapa, and he said, you know, ko era mea ngā Kare-ā-roto, ko te tino, me ki taonga tuku iho, ko te mōtetea. And many of you know that that was Wayne's doctoral work, but the words, the kōrero, the lament, the anguish that's expressed in mōtetea is ripe for understanding emotion. So I want to preface a kōrero on pūrākau by acknowledging that all the narratives, as Leonie said, that provide us for ways of thinking about emotions. And so pūrākau is just one way. It's not the way. A lot of people use pūrākau already, and mine is he tū whakaiti tēnei kei mua i a koutou, not just nervous in front of my mother, nervous in front of all these brainy people over here, everywhere, and people working in this field with emotion. So, you know, So, my father's family on the left. My father is in the back row, second from the right, surrounded by his siblings. My grandmother is directly in front of him, his mother, Nana Kahu. On the left-hand side, your right-hand side, is my mum's family. And my mum is on the far right. A little ribbon in her hair. How old were you, Mum? 5, 6. 5, yeah. And my, her family come from Zhongshan in South China, southern China. My grandfather came to New Zealand in the late 1920s, and my grandmother came as part of a refugee, Chinese women's refugee sort of group, which my mother has since written books about, so that's our whānau. And I just introduced my whānau because I want to lead into a story about how I got into pūrākau and thinking about emotions. So just to go back, the kaupapa really is to get us thinking about these questions. What can we learn from pūrākau about emotion? What can we learn from pūrākau about emotion? What can pūrākau teach us about emotions? Those are very similar. And I don't know, anyway, there was a teaching and learning thing going on there. And then how can pūrākau support emotional well-being? And I said yesterday, for those of us who are older and have grown up with the tradition of when you ask a question, you never get an answer. This is one of those times. This is asking the question to get us to think more deeply and using story to think about what the answers are to these questions, because actually the answers are different for you. That's why I can't give you the answer, and this project will help you think about the answer. But the answer for you is specific to you, especially as it relates to emotions. So when I started my master's, and lots of people say, why did you get into doing postgrad? And people have all these different answers. And then I say, well, my mother told me so. And Chinese tiger mothers go, you've got to go do that, and you go and do it. So I did my master's, and I was in Graham's class, and he was getting us to think about what our topics might be. And I thought, there was nothing written at that time on being Māori Chinese, and it wasn't that cool being Māori Chinese. People couldn't work out what that was. Like now it's very common to have beautiful, Māori Samoan, Māori Tongan, all these different mixtures of us. But growing up in Riverhead and West Auckland, and for my father in particular, he was born in the 1940s, you had to be one or the other. You were a half caste, and half caste weren't looked upon in a very good light. And even for me growing up, the stereotypes of us are so strong, so they still can't work it out really. Like, you sound like a Māori, but you look like a Chinese, so what does that mean? Can you sing? Are you good at accounting? All these sort of weird things going on for them. So the opportunity to pursue some study that was about us and give voice to being Māori was really important. And Graham Smith and Linda are amazing at that, just really appreciating the value that we bring and the value of all of our experiences Māori, and seeing them as important and seeing them as worthy of study and thinking and analysis and theorising. And so that was hugely encouraging. And so, being the good kaupapa Māori researcher I was, one of Graham's questions was, okay, so you want to think about this study, but who are you to do the study? And I thought, oh, that's true. Who am I to do this study? Why should I be the one to write about Māori Chinese? I'm just a little snotty-nosed kid. I don't know really much about anything. Why should I do it? So I went to ask my dad, and I remember this day because we met at a cafe on Upper Queen Street, and we were outside. And I said to Dad, I'm thinking about doing this kaupapa about being Māori Chinese. And he told me some stories, and I wasn't ready for them. I wasn't ready for them emotionally. And so I want to play you a very short piece of one of the stories he told me, just like he's telling you now, in this way, and then I'll come back. So just very quickly, Dad, we were at the
Oh, sorry.
is it going? We were at the cafe, and you can see in that photo that Dad's got his arms crossed. And actually, I was talking to Edu's brother the other day, and he was telling me about body language, and that's another whole kaupapa. But Dad spoke very quietly, very softly spoken man. I can never remember my father raising his voice. Very quiet, soft, gentle person. And so he told me the story about going to school, to intermediate school, and he had a teacher called Mr. Bishop. And he said, he used to turn up to school being quite excited about school. He was living in what he would refer to as a shack, a tin shack, that his father had was living in with, and he slept in a bed with his other 3 siblings. And he got to school, he was excited about learning, and his teacher, Mr. Bishop, never called him by his first name for the whole year. He called him Wong. You know, when my dad told me that story, I was in tears, my father was in tears, and it wasn't about just name calling. It was about having a moment to reflect on that incident that actually had impacted his whole life. In terms of not feeling confident to be Māori. He talked about not wanting to go into the kapahaka group but standing on the side and playing the guitar. Not being that confident about being Chinese. Not just generally being in the margins. And even though he felt anger and rage, he couldn't say anything to his teacher because of, recognising the power dynamic of teacher and student. And he talks about the way the teacher used his power to disadvantage him through schooling, through that year, whether it be on the sports field or in class or whatever it might be. So I was really sort of shocked that my father had told me this. I thought I was going to write this nice little master's thesis about being Māori Chinese and be neat and tidy and do my stories and be all done with it. And I got thrown. I thought, how do I begin to write this feeling a-wairuane into the story I now have to tell in my master's? And so I did my best, and I did write a book after my master's called Jade Taniwha, and the stories are there, and the way that I formatted the stories were slightly different because in that time, a long time ago, in the early 90s, we were using oral history as the main narrative inquiry method. And so, started to try and think about this in a more cultural way, and that was the impetus that led me to thinking more about pūrākau, because I needed to be able to capture the emotion in the story. It's not enough to say, you've got to read the silences. It's very difficult to read silences in a flat, one-dimensional interview, from an interview. So I think it's important that I just explain that to you, because my work with pūrākau comes from an educational foundation. It comes from a research methodological foundation. I'm not a pūrākau expert. I have thought about pūrākau for a long time, and I have been, I've had the privilege of talking to lots of people about pūrākau as part of my work, but I would never say I'm a pūrākau expert. So bringing the work that I've done to you for you to think more about. So apologies for those of you who've heard about pūrākau many times, and just wanting to quickly remind us all about the theorising of pūrākau as a way to think more deeply into this. But in brief, pūrākau literally refers to the pū, the base or foundation of a rākau. And myself and others, really grateful to have lots of time with Wiremu Doherty, who talked to me about the bush and going hunting and all sorts of things, but about trees and rongoa. And we started to theorise about why this term, pūrākau, was a word for stories. And so from a Māori worldview, and drawing on the etymology of the word pūrākau, or te pū o te rākau, I would suggest it's not a metaphor. Rather, we are descendants of Tāre Mahuta. We share a whakapapa with the trees. We are from the trees, and the trees remain part of us. So rethinking pūrākau in that way makes us think about the power of story and the importance of story. Pūrākau are not just myths, legends, fables and fictions, are not vignettes, they're not case studies, they're not profiles. Pūrākau are a vital part of our cultural fabric that identifies us and binds us to our landscape, the seascape, our maraiscape, our maramataka-scape, and it spans time and space. And I just want to sort of make 3 points, if I can, about pūrākau in relation to emotions. The first is that pūrākau, went through a process of colonisation. Colonising pūrākau as a tool was important for researchers, early ethnographers. And so part of our work when we're using pūrākau is to think about the decolonising of our pūrākau. Really important to understand how a pūrākau have been colonised, whether they've been gendered or hybridised or purported to be a singular story. And one of the other, and there's some ideas there, and mainly from Ani Makaire's amazing work, that they were purged for purity. There's very much of Victorian and Christian sensibilities around writing pūrākau, around writing our stories. They weren't to be rude. They had to be commodified for consumption, so nice, tidy packaging of a story, a beginning, middle and end would be great. Not too many different versions of Māui, one version and let's just put that up. And I would also argue that they were fairly emotionless. So, Merita Mita, those of you who have been in the media and know mana wahine history and leaders, talked about storytelling in this way. Our storytelling began to be disempowered the day the stranger began recording our stories, writing them down. From that day on, our stories started to change. They became passive collections of words and phrases, sentences and paragraphs, pages of misinterpreted coding, derivative imagery, superficial characters and shallow portrayals. To the stranger from the West, mere collections of fantasy and myth. And I think that's important for us to not only acknowledge, but if we're going to use pūrākau, how are we going to pick that up and make that different? One of the things in lots of the pūrākau we tell now is that we tend to gloss really quickly over things, because in our thirst to reclaim and revitalise our reo, our culture, our tikanga, our histories, I think, and in this time-confined society where technology is fast and our kids want things quickly and they want to see the TikTok and blah, 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 there's no time to really pause in pūrākau. So I want to take this opportunity to pause and give you a little activity, because I want to talk all the time, and think about, and you can do this at your table or in pairs, a pūrākau that you know that is often told without emotion. And if you had a chance, just rewrite 2 sentences of it. And then I'd like some of you to read that out. So it might be, for instance, the separation of rangi and papa. It might be te pukuriri o tāwhiri mātea. It might be whatever you like, okay? But just to have a minute to think about a pūrākau that's often told and that you could rewrite the emotion back into it. Ka pai? Rima meneti? Ka pai.
Probably not. I can't find anything on my computer.
Do you need longer? Kia ora. Can we take this? No. Kōrero mai.
Tēnā tātou katoa. The pūrākau patu patu. Kura mai tuku. She's our tūpuna. My sister wanted to rewrite that story. Kei te taho o te atu e nei, but she wanted to rewrite that story and tell it from our lens. Kura mai tuku. She was beautiful. He manu, we wrote this song. Might be easier if I just did it in a song.
Kia ora, kia ora.
About her, but my sister really wanted to rewrite that story. Because for us, it was what was Hatu Hatu doing, on our whenua. That was her place. Who said those birds were locked up? And why was she so ugly? Why was she portrayed as ugly? Because that's my tūpuna. And why did she have to die? By falling in those hot ponds. So we wrote this song, and it's a beautiful little song, and if you know it, please sing along with me. And it's Kura mai tuku he manu aine, Kare ki runga. Kura mai tuku he manu aine, ka ki te atu hatu patu e, hatu patu he tāmaki. Ka hakere ki te o mahai au e, ka peri ka runa, ka noho pupu e, I roto te kohatu, a hatu patu e.
Kia ora. Kia ora whaia. Kōrero anō. Kia ora.
Iringa I tō wāka whakawhaitea. Ka hoki, he kitinga kanohi ka hoki ngā mahara. E ka hoki ngā mahara ki taua whakatauki, e hara te kumara e kōrero mo tō marika. E I rongo pai I roto I tērā, ahakoa we kumara sometimes, and sometimes the sweetness of the kumara and the essence of the kumara can speak for itself. But then we think of our hine amaru. And hina amaru, ki hai ki taua waiata. Hine amaru, he te pūna kai arahi I roto waio ka puta, te kopu o te whenua, he kumara, he tangata. So he waiata, and that waiata talks about our hine amaru. and also valuing the kumara, but also hime amaru and the kupu of the whenua, and cultivating our kumara from up north. And that kōrero, being able to utilise our kumara and that whakapapa mai hine amaru to our whenua, and from our whenua to our iwi and our hapu. Hei aha, hei hapai, hei ora, mo te tinana hei ora.
Kia ora.
Tēnā kōrua mō kōrua whakaaro hohonu mo te kaupapa nei. The way our pūrākau have been colonised, have been confined, have been rewritten, have been marginalised, have been hurt, is something that we need to focus on and revive and recomplexify and really be critically thinking about who wrote it, what was the audience, why was it written this way, whose perspective is it. The purpose of this exercise in terms of foregrounding emotion was to encourage us, one, to see how easily it is when we tell stories to gloss over things. So, for example, and the world was dark. And so the children of Rangi and Papa decided to separate them. Now, for those of you who are working with children, for those of us who have been separated, for those of us who've grown up with parents who are separated, there's lots of emotion in that. There's trauma often, there's implications that go on for many years. So if we rewrote those simple things with a deeper understanding, we would begin to see new kurahuna in our pūrākau. And that's what I'm encouraging us to do. Because if we foreground the emotion, the kurahuna start to get really in your face, really prominent. And so for us who are writing, for those of us who are in research and academia, I'm just encouraging us to write in different ways. And this book, Pūrākau, some of you will have seen. I want to just read an example of a beautifully written, just a couple of paragraphs written by Briar Grace Smith about the birth and return of Māui Tiki a Taranga as observed by his sister Hina. And it's called Born Still. Hina's hair trailed down her back like a wave of frizzing, hissy sea foam. Her eyes were shiny as if someone had smothered cling wrap over two buttons of the greyest sky and pushed them deep into the lunar whiteness of her skin. She was the only girl in a home full of brothers. Like so many male prime ministers and presidents, these four boys named Maui Mua, Maui Taha, Maui Pai and Maui Roto spent their time trying to prove to each other they were the best at anything and everything that they happened to be doing, whether it be boxing, scoring goals, pissing or nose-picking. The brothers were like an extension of the same person, except for small differences. They all looked similar, and once they started in action, they all copied it, only the next in line would do it more loudly, more violently, and with much more swag. From sunset to sunset, poor Hina was smothered in a boy's tsunami of legs, arms, body odour and noise. It was only in her mother's presence that there was peace. The children's mother, Taranga, was a lighthouse in a raging testosteronic sea. Straight-backed and sure-footed, she glided through the turbulent boys, negotiating the troubled spots, picking up clothes and toys with her feet, tossing them into the air and catching them in her long-fingered hands. Her voice was a laser strike of honey that broke through the 2-metre thick wall of thumping, banging, shouting, forcing the brothers to all shut up and listen. I hope that touched a chord in you for any of the mothers in the room that have boys, any of the sisters in the room that have brothers, and all the brothers in the room that have brothers. And the way that we write and think and read into our pūrākau, they are full of emotion, and they will touch emotions if you enable them to. The second point I quickly want to make So we'll move, is this idea of the singular pūrākau. And in research, the frame of reference is often used in search for the facts, the immutable truth, and often this is always one-dimensional. In Te Ao Māori, and what we learn from pūrākau in particular, the way that our trees grow as our rākau not only thrive in groups and best with natural diversity, but are the best with our natural diversity of our ecosystems. And I argue that our pūrākau, our stories, are also richer in the plural. For instance, there is not just one story of Tāne Mahuta, but multiple stories of Tāne Mahuta, Tāne Te Wānanga, as he travels to Te Rangi Tū Hāhā to retrieve the kete of knowledge, the kete of knowledges. Tāne who breathes life into Hine Ahuone to create humankind. Tāne who sleeps with his daughter Hine Titama, who flees to become Hine Nui Te Pō. There are multiple stories. These stories are not always easy or necessarily positive, and we have to really grapple with the meaning and the much deeper understanding of specific stories. But this is the layered complexity of life, of our history, of ecosystems, of environments. And I want you to pause in that and think about the work that we do, in particular those of us in healing and involved in counselling, or those of us doing research and we do one interview. We do one interview, it's an hour long in duration, and we leave and we go. And we know if we'd gone back and we do another interview, and we did another interview, and we did another interview, and we did 5 interviews, the richness of those stories. But we do one interview because we need to get 50 interviews done, because we think 50 interviews are going to bring more meaning till we reach saturation to understand something. They may, if we are interested in a particular phenomenon, potentially. But if you are interested in the human spirit, I would suggest you need to have as many stories that may contradict each other from, in this particular case, the same person, to start to get to the depth. You can't do one counselling session, you can't do one interview, and that the multiple stories of the same thing will provide a much richer, even if it's contradictory, picture of the portrayal of the situation. Of course, our people understood this. We have multiple versions of the same story amongst tribal groups, within tribal groups, between kāinga. They can be slightly different renditions, and each embedded with their own particular message and meaning as they respond to time, place and audience. And of course, purpose. And some will be spoken with real emotion. Beautiful voice, as in our whai kōrero today, tērā kōrero, te whai kōrero ka titi te manawa e, tērā I rongo koe tērā reo pērā I te karanga. That tone of voice, really piercing sometimes, like waiata. But sometimes, a pūrākau can be delivered in a soft, quiet, paced voice and full of emotion. And Moana Jackson was an exemplar of that, full of emotion. So there is not one way of expressing emotion, articulating emotion, or seeing emotion and feeling emotion. Well, let's move that. The third point I really want to make, so the first is about the sort of flat renditions, one-dimensional ideas of pūrākau that are emotionless or decentering the emotion. The second is having multiple stories to see it and feel and understand emotion. And the third is this idea for listening for story or listening for emotion. I really draw on Dr. Joanne Archibald, a friend of ours, an amazing academic from the Stolo Nation in Canada, and she has written about Indigenous story work. And it resonates with pūrākau because our pūrākau are inherently pedagogical. They're inherently filled with teaching and learning. Our stories, our pūrākau, like story work, expects that you do some work. This is not like a bedtime story where you'll just listen to it and fall off to sleep. If you want a bedtime story, read something heavily academic. You'll be asleep in 2 minutes. Not our pūrākau. Pūrākau, you have to work. You have to work to create and craft pūrākau if they're really going to pack a punch. You have to work to tell them. You have to work to capture the audience. You have to work to listen and learn from them. You have to work to find the kurahuna. You have to work to understand them, work to protect them, work to grow them, and ultimately work to live them. So this quote here is from Joanne, and it's interviewing one of the elders, one of her elders, and it talks about the inside. Stories from the inside, or I've got a little chapter called From the Inside Out, and it's in this chapter. They said you learn from the base, the very basic, the inside, the stern, the core, and then expand out. The teacher will already know that it's like a big tree. Never mind the apples or if it's the flowers. We're going to learn inside first and then out, they said. Never from the outside first. I think that's got some really powerful directives for us when we're listening to story. And I'd suggest that one of the things that they're saying is, don't listen to the words, listen to the people, how people are feeling. How are you feeling before what is the matter? Because I rongo koe, ki tērā āwhatanga, you're in a different space. This is not and I've been to many different support groups and tried to get a lot of different support for a number of things. And the first thing you do is you go into a room and a person pulls out the piece of paper and you've got to answer all these questions. Then you can, if you tick all the boxes, then you can move on to the next phase. And by the time you've done that, you don't want to really talk to anyone. It's sort of a bit done. But if you flip that around and you just looked at how the person felt. Hey, hono ki tōna wairua, te timatanga, kātahi ka pātai ira pātai. Ka huri rauna, tēnei, one of these processes. So Joanne's talking about this in terms of story work, in terms of telling stories. So I think, it's a reminder for us in this context to move cautiously, to move with patience, to move with respect, to move with reverence. We know that listening is more than hearing with our ears. The Māori word for whakarongo is translated as the word to listen, but actually refers to feeling with all our senses, including our emotions. At Awi's Tangi, when we were here, we had 60, 70-year-old men coming in, tāngi hotu hotu, really upset that their high school teacher had died and how powerful he was in their lives. And through the 4 days, both at Te Mahurehure and Waipiro Bay on the East Coast, hundreds of stories were told. Hundreds of stories of recollections of rugby games. I can't believe how many rugby game stories there are. In 1956, hundreds of rugby stories, hundreds of stories about schooling. But those stories were told in a safe place of the tangihanga, of the marae, in that context. And there's two lessons here. One for me was ensuring that the place is set up, or the cultural conditions exist for you to have trust to tell a story. I mean, that's sort of 101, but it's important. Don't expect people, when you're interviewing them, to suddenly link into their emotions with you, and you don't even know them. What is that space that you need to create, if that is in fact what you're wanting people to express? How do you do that? The marae, the tangihanga was one of those places. So those stories were shared in the pō whakamutunga, they were shared on the paipai in the whaikoro, they were shared in the kitchen, they were shared when we were having a cup of tea. So the second point is those stories were healing. Or every time someone told a story, every time someone listened to a story, every time someone laughed about a story, every time someone cried about a story, that was a collective healing process that we were going through. So the stories are powerful. They're important. And even though some of us have heard stories again and again and again, they're important. I was thinking about our grandmother, Mata Wihongi, and I don't know if I've said this to you, Mum, but I always remember going to see my grandmother, our grandmother Bern, and I'd say, oh, how's your day been? And we used to call her Popo. It's a Chinese name for a grandmother, because her first language was Māori, but she also spoke Chinese. And she'd go, oh, yep, well, today I got in my car and then I drove out of my driveway and then I drove down that road there and then I turned right and then I went into the shop and then I saw someone and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like trying to distill, like get to the point, waiting patiently. And now I think back on it, I think, what was she doing? Why was she taking so long? Why was I having to wait in the story? What was she trying to do to get me to calm down and not listen to the story but for the story? And to connect with Rangi's kōrero about time being the coloniser, because we're always on time, like we've got to go, we've got meetings. We've got this, we've got that, everything else. But, I think story, pūrākau, will slow you down. If you're going to do it properly, it's going to slow you down and get you to think more deeply about things. The last point I want to make, and I'm probably out of time, Leonie, is that I don't want to romanticize pūrākau, I don't want to romanticize this idea of emotion. I'm not advocating that everyone write emotional pūrākau or get up and cry like I do usually when I talk, although Papahui has told me it's a good day today. I'm wanting to draw attention, as I said, to emotion, as Leonie said, being everywhere, but often not acknowledging it, recognising it, giving it the value that we need to give it to understand the depth of meaning within people's stories. It is not an unproblematic shift from emotional writing or emotional telling to academia, as many of you will know. And academia, of course, expects you to write in a particular way. It expects you to lay things out in an evidence-based way. It expects you to have, if there's an emotional story, put it in a little box and leave it there. So, it is difficult, and we have to transition these spaces as kaupapa Māori researchers and writers in our scholarly work. One of the groups of people that are doing this are those working in literary theory. And I wanted to just read a quote from Takan Ree, which is in Evelyn Corr's article in our book, Decolonising Research Indigenous Story Workers Methodology, because I think it points out really clearly the cautionary way we have to move in to academic writing, knowing the audience and not wanting to reveal and I'm not wanting to reveal all of us. Okay. In telling you all of this in this way, I am resigning myself and you to the idea that parts of my telling are confounding. I care about you understanding, but I care more about concealing parts of myself from you. I don't trust you very much. You are not always aware of how you can be dangerous to me, and this makes me dangerous to you. I am using my arm to determine the length of the gaze. At the same time I tell, I wonder about the different endings, the unfurled characters, the lies that didn't make it to the page, the anti-heroes who did not get the shine of my attention. Yes, I am telling you a story, but you may be reading another one. Ka nui mo tēnei wā, nui te mihi kia koutou, kia toitu ngā pūrākau, ki roto i ngā kāinga, ki roto i ngā hapu, i ngā hāpore, a tēnā koutou katoa.